I see. Okay.
There we go. So hello.
Hello.
To to start off with, would you like to say your name and where you are?
My name is Carol Brockman, and I'm in Elkins Park, Pennsylvania, which is right at the edge of Philadelphia.
Mhm.
Um, so I could say Philadelphia would make more sense, but technically I'm not quite there.
Okay. So I'm sure you know probably that the first big question is who are you? Who are you as a human being? And that can be your values, your passions, your interests, or qualities, whatever you'd like to share.
So the first thing that comes to my mind is that I'm a person of huge enthusiasms, and they have varied at different times in my life, but each one has provided a sort of thread. And one of my images for myself is a thread gatherer. It's the things that um, tend to fit together in ways that I never foresaw. Um, and my work in Gestalt therapy feels to me like a culmination of a lot of those threads. Um, I don't know if you want to hear more about what they are
Yeah, I'm
or if
curious
that's
about,
enough.
colors, textures, different kinds of threads, what those might be.
Well, I um, I was born in 1940, and my parents were Russian Jewish immigrants who came here as escapees from the pogroms
Mm.
in their childhoods. Um, and so social justice has been a thread in my growing up and in my life, and it's taken a lot of different twists and turns. Um, uh, I've started out with one point of view and come to very different points of view over time, but there's something really consistent about that thread.
Mm.
And um, getting very enthusiastic about, um, I want to say, making things. Sometimes it's been writing, sometimes it's been quilting, sometimes it's cooking, sometimes it's studying and working, but um, whatever I do, I throw myself into, and then it changes who I am, and then it has a relationship to everything else that I do. Um, so I was a reader from the time I was very small. Um, I was a writer from the point a point where I wasn't so small. Um, I was curious about people uh, for all of my life, and I sort of inherited from my parents the feeling that the world's a pretty dangerous place and you have to be pretty
Mm.
vigilant. So all of those things are threads that
Mhm.
are important. And metaphor and storytelling has also been a very powerful part of my thinking and my life. And you can see where that all of those things can knit themselves into Gestalt therapy. There's this social
Absolutely.
justice thread. People don't think of Paul Goodman as much as they think of Fritz Perls and as much as they think of other aspects of Gestalt therapy. But social justice has always had a place.
Mhm. So when you say social justice, what is that for you? And I usually ask, I go back to people's values, and I am curious, what
Mhm.
is it that you look at in terms of justice or injustice?
It's really a complicated question for me. Okay, I already told you that my parents were pogrom survivors.
Hmm.
Um, they were also communists. Um,
Hmm.
until Stalin was exposed at the 20th Congress in 1955. And so I grew up in a household that had both memories of oppression and a philosophy about oppression, and where people were entirely betrayed by their belief system and then didn't know what to do with themselves at the moment that I was a rebellious 15-year-old. And
Mm.
so I had been deeply trained to believe certain things which were now being thrown away absolutely and completely. And it was a shock. And so, how you find out what's real and what's not real, and who you trust and who you believe and what you believe, became of powerful interest to me. So, what I can say is that I was active as a very young person in the civil rights movement in the 50s and the 60s. Um, I emerged from one form of activism and one form of belief into having to learn how you question everything that has been told to you. Um, I saw myself on the side of the good people until I started realizing that you can't be white in this world without white privilege. You can't be gendered in this world without dealing with all kinds of gender privilege and gender identity privilege,
Hmm.
and that everything is much more complicated than it looks. And so, if you ask me what I'm doing right now, I work with Gestalt International Study Center in Massachusetts. My my teachers in Gestalt were first Irvin Miriam Polster. I was
Okay.
very lucky. I'm that second generation. I didn't work with Fritz, but I worked with the people who sort of inherited the Cleveland legacy of that time.
Hmm.
And then with Sonia Nevis and Edwin Nevis too, but Sonia was the person that I had tied my professional life to, and I still I work in systems in Gestalt therapy. I work with couples and families and more intimate systems, but some organizational systems as well, and political systems. And what I'm doing at this particular moment, since the Black Lives Matter movement took such prominence, um, is looking at us as an organization in Cape Cod where we're very white, and um, our clientele is often very white, and questioning that. And so right now, with a colleague running a study group on white privilege, white people working on white privilege,
Hmm.
and basically working up a model to have 6 facilitated sessions, and then the group will be let loose on its own, and we'll do another series of introductory sessions and see if we get interest for another group. So that's that's something that I'm doing right now. I'm also um, a mother and a grandmother. Um, I'm a cisgendered white woman. I'm a lesbian. I'm a Jew. I'm not religious. Um, I don't know where all of those things feel like part of my own particular interest in social justice, um, has roots in my belly and roots in the world.
Hmm. That is a that's an answer that's full of all kinds of awareness. That's a really it's just a very rich kind of spiraling answer to things I haven't even asked yet, but that are in there somewhere. So another question that I do have is about a particular experience that comes to mind for you. as something that you would say really marked you or shaped you or influenced you. It can be a specific or event or a set of circumstances, but I think you've spoken to a lot of the circumstances that you seem to have emerged from.
Hmm.
I don't know if a particular event comes to mind.
Um, I think the one that comes to mind first, I don't know if I had thought about that, is this the one that I would have chosen?
Mhm.
But um, one of my first experiences with Sonia Nevis was during the couple and family training program, which is now the Cape Cod Model Training Program, and I teach in it. But I was just learning, and we were talking about working with couples, and uh, I said, I asked Sonia, what if you just happen to like one of the members of a couple more than you like the other? And she looked at me. I don't know if you know who Sonia is, but she's a small, white haired, um, soft spoken person. And she said, what's it your business to like or not to like? And it went right inside me. I mean, her talent was for saying what a person can hear when a person can hear it. And how she knew, I don't know. But it suddenly reached all the way inside me that my business with whoever I'm working with has nothing to do with my preferences. And it was a revelation. And lots of her interventions were revelations like that.
Hmm.
She said
Okay.
things like, the person that it's safe to be intimate with isn't somebody who doesn't hurt you. There's no way to have an ongoing intimate relationship with somebody who doesn't hurt you. It's the person who cares about their impact.
Hmm.
And again, it was it was that moment of, how can you see the tree when there are so many leaves distracting you? And I want that.
Mhm.
I want to be able to see that.
Okay. So, would you say that Sonia is one of the major influences in your life or in your work?
I would say she's the major influence in my life and my work. I adore the pollsters. Don't I learned so much in that training program.
Hmm.
Um, and I love them both. I love Miriam more. But
I'm not asking you to pick
as a
favorites. That's okay.
student, I give myself that. But but I think working with the space between people is what I love. And Sonia was right after the relational space. It's what
Hmm.
happens in that space. What is the interaction? And that is uh, what spoke to me the most and what drew me in.
Hmm. So you started out with the pollsters, and how did you end up there? How did you meet Gestalt? How did you get presented or
I
introduced?
I uh, before I knew I was a lesbian, I was married and I had a couple of kids and I got divorced and I went to graduate school in social work, came back to Philadelphia when I was 37. And I accidentally was exploring lots of things. I went to a Gestalt workshop in somebody's home, not anyone who was particularly um, deeply trained. But I told you, I'm a person of big enthusiasms. I loved the workshop, and so I read everything I could get my hands on. And then it felt more consistent with who I was
Mm.
than anything else that I had encountered. And so I started asking around, and nobody knew anything. So I went by my favorite book at the moment, which was Gestalt therapy integrated, of what I had read, that was the one that caught my imagination. And I said, well, that's the book I love best. That's who I'll go learn from.
There you
And I tracked down how and where, and it wasn't very hard to sign up, and I managed to do it.
go. And so, what is it that you specifically found? Is there a concept? Is there something that just, like you said, reached right into you or stayed with
Yeah.
you?
It What I was learning and how I was learning it felt to me exactly like my relationship with poetry. That
Hmm.
there were so many layers that when you really stop and say what's here and now, and you really stay in it, you're going all the way down past the floor. You're really digging deep into the layers of experience. It's like a metaphor can involve one sense or every sense, or one part of its meaning, or multiple parts of its meaning. And that's how the work felt to me. It wasn't formulaic, it wasn't intellectual, it wasn't academic. I can play those games, but they don't grab my soul.
Hmm. And so you said, it sounded like half a thought. You said before you realized that you were a lesbian, you were going through all of these sort of searching processes in different ways. Can you say a bit more, if you want to, about how you understand and experience yourself within your gender and in your identities?
Um, I'll tell you the story I tell myself. Okay.
Okay.
Which is that I think there are probably about 5% of people in the world who could only be straight. And there are probably about 5% of people in the world who could only be gay. And the rest of us, depending on where we are, at what stage in development, we have lots of possibilities. And we may never have the bandwidth to explore them, or we may get triggered to explore them in some particular way. I think the fact that I experienced and was really active in the women's movement um, really made me extremely conscious of all the possibilities. Um, I don't think it was relevant when I was attached. I didn't leave I left my marriage because it fell apart. I didn't leave my marriage because I came out.
Yeah.
And when I left my marriage, I was interested in all the possibilities. And suddenly, in my field, in my world, uh, there were these other possibilities that I was curious about. And um, and I might never have acted on that curiosity, um, but I did. And it, I don't know what it means to call myself a lesbian now. I'm single. I'm not actively pursuing anybody or any relationship. It does feel like a piece of my identity.
Hmm.
Um, I'm happy to claim it. Uh, it's not something that's particularly active
Hmm.
right now. Um, but I have this whole period of history in my life and my child raising um, and my world and my relationship with my sons-in-law and um, um, so um, it became a wide open possibility for me when it at the same time that it was becoming a wide open possibility in the world,
Hmm.
in my world.
Okay. Hmm. And I'm curious about another aspect, which is how you would say Gestalt has affected you as a person, and also how it's affected you as a mother.
Um, Let me say one other thing about my work history to put it in context.
Hmm.
Before I got my degree, I spent 14 years of my working life working with severely disturbed children in institutional settings, mostly autistic and psychotic children. So, number one, it gave me a powerful orientation to family therapy and to uh, all of the competing concepts and notions about the influence of family.
Hmm.
And um, beyond that, it gave me a really deep look at the medical model of psychotherapy. And when I listened to Irv's interview and I heard him talking about um, holiday space or church space. He was talking about the sacred space that happens in relationship, in psychotherapy, in this suspended world. He uses the word enchantment, and I might use other words, but it's the same concept that we're talking about.
Hmm.
It's stepping into this space where you really have to learn to suspend your judgment, your prejudices. You have to open yourself and maintain your boundary. And there's something so exciting about that. So it was the experiences of the Gestalt therapy that I experienced while in training. I mean, it. I don't know whether Gestalt still is apprenticeship in the same way that it felt like when I was coming up, but um, it did feel like apprenticeship, and part of the apprenticeship was establishing that incredible space in which something profound happens, both to your own awareness and to the awareness of the system that you're part of when you're in that therapy situation, whether it's a
Hmm.
group or um, an individual therapist.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It does, at least in my experience, it does feel very much like a learning to hold the space rather than learning to do a series of
Hmm.
techniques and behaviors.
Right.
Hmm. So, how would you say that this understanding of those sort of sacred or therapeutic spaces or these accepting spaces have affected you as a mother? I'm just curious about going back to
Oh,
that
that was your
part.
question, wasn't it?
Hmm.
Uh, um,
Because I mean, just working with those incredibly severely affected children, and I can imagine in very traumatized and traumatizing settings.
yes, that was before I had kids. I couldn't do it anymore
Hmm.
after I had kids of my own. You
Yeah,
can't watch
no,
your own kids that way. Um,
no.
it's not good for them. Um, I think I think it made me wide open to real exchanges with them. I think how they felt, what they thought, what they wanted, what they hated, it counted with me.
Hmm.
And um, um, I can tell you two things that they felt like outcomes. It's very hard to be aware of how you're parenting at every moment.
Yes.
But my younger daughter was not very comfortable in high school, and at some point she had taken some abuse in a swim class from some boys who were teasing her about the size of her breasts, and the swim coach was basically telling her to forget about it. And she threw a fit and got sent to the principal, and the principal threatened to call her mother. And she said, "You call my mother anytime you want. She doesn't let anybody talk to me like that."
Nice.
Um, and I felt like she she really did learn how what she doesn't have to tolerate.
Mm-hmm.
That was that was one of the pieces. And I had a funny little ceremony when I turned 50. I had a croning ceremony,
Oh.
and people wrote things to me. And my older daughter uh, wrote a little 1 page letter, and it ended with the sentence, "Thank you for making this a safe place to live and a safe place to leave."
Oh,
Which
that's
is
wonderful.
exactly what I said.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's not that we didn't have plenty of conflict, but I feel like we had an enormous amount of dialogue,
Mm-hmm.
and that the dialogue was really deep dialogue, and I still feel like that's what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like it's what happens with my grandchildren.
Wonderful.
Um, my We were discussing. I have family in Brooklyn and family in Amsterdam, so it's hard to to not see the little one in Amsterdam. But the ones in Brooklyn were talking about uh, not coming during the holidays, and how it wasn't safe. And then 2 days before, they called me. The kids did, and they said, "Mom and Dad wanted to surprise you, but we didn't want you to be sad for 2 more days." And they said, "This is what we want to do. We want to come with boots and heavy coats and blankets and masks, and we'll stay outside. We'll drive down from Brooklyn. We'll stay for as many hours as we can stand to be outside in the cold,
Oh,
and then we'll go home. But we want to open our gifts together."
oh.
And that's what they did. But it's not only that that's what they did, they really thought that they didn't want me to be sad that I wasn't going to see them for another 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of our conversation. An 18-year-old boy and a 16-year-old girl who have dialogue with their grandmother. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm
And
just
some
so moved
complicity
by
and
that, and
mm-hmm.
empathy and awareness of, who I am and what I'm likely to feel.
Mm-hmm. You have some
Um,
co-conspirators there, I think.
which I just thought was delicious.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. Hmm. So
So
you've mentioned age a couple of times now. I'm
mhm.
wondering if, sorry, go ahead and finish that thought.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask how you're experiencing your age or age in general.
Um, it's a mixed bag. It really is. Um, um, there are the organ recitals that anybody my age could give you. You can see my arthritis, um, and yet I've got my mind. I've got my work. I've got no thoughts about retiring.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I am. I'm teaching. I'm adapting to Zoom. I'm working with families that I've never seen in my life and face to face, and it's working okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I feel like I know what I'm doing. I
Hmm.
know how to do what I do. Um, and I've watched enough people deteriorate so that I know that it could happen to me. It could happen anytime. I don't want to waste a minute of what I can do.
Hmm.
And I love the engagement. The whole idea of developing this white privilege project, it was like a new lease on life. It was okay, let's organize all of this. I've been working with this stuff most of my life. Um, and I missed this piece of it. I
Mm.
never thought of myself as white. That wasn't part of the identity that I claimed.
Hmm.
And it isn't part of the privilege that I recognize in myself.
Hmm.
So I agree with all my Black friends and colleagues who are saying, go do your own work. Don't
Hmm.
ask us to teach you how.
Yep. New
And
layers of learning.
and so um, I feel I feel really good about not being too old to adapt to what's happening now. But I feel the physical losses and the isolation, especially
Hmm.
during COVID, um, and it's pretty profound and impactful. And
Hmm.
I also absolutely love the way my work colleagues are a community. I mean, last night the people that I teach with and I spent the evening playing word games on the computer because it's just one of the ways that we make sure that we're not all too isolated in our separate little corners.
Hmm.
And so instead of just having meetings about business, we wind up keeping socially engaged any way we can, especially when we can't see each other.
Hmm.
And so, um, on the one hand, I want to keep that going as long as I can, and on the other hand, I realize that I'm at somewhere close to the far end of this.
But it seems like in a pretty sweet spot, all things considered.
Yes,
Hmm. So you mentioned the word colleagues, and I'm wondering if that extends to a sense of community. Would you say that you feel a part of a Gestalt community? Does that mean anything to you?
profoundly. Yes,
Hmm.
yes.
Would you say anything more about that?
Um, I would say that there are lots of layers of it. When I was active in AAGT, and being president of AAGT tends to be a fairly traumatizing experience for most people, and many disappear after that for a while. And I'm one of the ones that sort of disappeared permanently. But my relationships from that time didn't disappear. So I love people from right across the spectrum. I mean, when I saw when I was going down the list um, of people in the Gestalt Humans project, I felt so much affection when I saw um, Bob Resnick, when I saw Irv Polster, when I saw uh, all of the people that I've been connected with over the years. And
Hmm.
most of them also had at least peripheral connections with Sonia and Edwin
Hmm.
Nevis. Um, so that's a wider range. I don't know if you knew Isabel Fredrickson, but she was another absolute
No.
gem.
Hmm.
Um, and I, we light up when we see each other. Okay, it was a maybe 3 or 4 years of working closely together,
Hmm.
and uh, what I do in couples therapy and what Bob and Rita do in couples therapy is very, very different, and um, and we can thoroughly enjoy each other's work. It's not a it's not a competition. Nobody cares
Hmm.
about being right. We express ourselves the way we express ourselves. We um, we have very different um, styles and preoccupations, and we make lots of room for each other.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Resnicks are so generous. It's just um, lovely.
Mm-hmm.
And and then there are my close colleagues at the center. Joe Melnick, who you probably know if you've been around AAGT.
Yep. Yep.
He
Yep.
um, he and Sharona Halpern are the head of our program, and Stuart Simon and Nancy Rutkowski teach in our program, which is the Cape Cod Model Program.
Mm-hmm.
And we have wrestled each other to the ground figuratively. We have worked through all kinds of uh, difficulties and differences. Um, we would do anything for each other. We are um, uh, profoundly interested in doing the work that we're doing and doing it well, and
Mm-hmm.
feel like somebody's always got our back.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she's not a clinician in the same way, but Laurie Fitzpatrick, who runs the organization, is a force to be reckoned with and has managed to keep us alive virtually in a way that I don't know that we could have done without her. So uh, I picked up people. I'm not in any way connected with GTIP, the Philadelphia Institute,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the people who was in my Sonia supervision group that I was in for 30 years is one of the directors of that institute, and we're still meeting. Sonia's been gone, but we're we're still meeting. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that institute has my support, and I have theirs. It feels to
Mm-hmm.
me like, and and I've taught in Sweden, I've taught in England. Joe teaches all over the world. It feels to me like uh, keeping community going is one of the most important things that we do.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Okay. So, I mean, it's just, I'm sort of feeling the weight of that because this is not a community you've been involved with, with for 2 or 3 years. So,
Right.
hearing you say that from where you are right now, that is significant. And I'm also wondering about sort of the weight of your own accumulated career. And I'm wondering what you would say about your own work or your own, I think you used the word legacy. How do you see that or how do you feel that?
I, I, I said something in the beginning about gathering threads.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's an integration of uh, social awareness and social justice, of relational issues, and the space and process and connections between and among people,
Mm-hmm.
um, the building of community, and the notion of sacred space to look at yourself and to. Sonia once said in a little interview something about, is awareness bearable, that you just can't assume that everybody can bear anything at any time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the discernment to have a sense of getting the signals about what a system can bear and following the responsiveness and the willingness of the person or system that you're working with
Mm-hmm.
is the most important thing that you ever need to learn. Like, when is the moment that something can be born and can be used and isn't going to be too much and too crushing? How can you not be too protective and not be too pushy? Um, I think that that feels like it's in my bones now.
Mm.
I won't say that I never make a mistake and that I don't have to make repairs. I will say that I think I'm pretty good at making repairs.
Mm.
And it's easy for me to make repairs. And it's easy for me to be sorry when I hurt someone. And it's
Mm-hmm.
easy for me to um, humble myself a little bit if that needs to be expressed. And
Mm-hmm.
that part of that has to do with losing all interest in having any particular kind of an image. That
It's the ego has to go out the window, huh?
I think so. I think so. And I think if it doesn't, it gets in the way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's funny with Gestalt because Gestalt has this theatrical track in it. It's got a piece of its history that's so full of drama and it creates such a wonderful space for that little bit of narcissism that
Mm-hmm.
there's always room for it. There's always a huge amount of room um, for self-aggrandizement or self-promotion or whatever, and it just isn't so interesting to
Mm-hmm.
me.
And it's a paradoxical part even of these conversations. I mean, I'm holding a space for people to talk about themselves in a way that's not inviting narcissistic exhibitionism, and it's kind
Right,
of interesting. There's the self, and then there's the performative self. I think it's
right,
different.
right.
Right. So, and would you say though that, I mean, I did hear that, this is the lesson that you would like to leave. Would you say that there is a lesson that you're taking away from Gestalt after all of this?
Um, well, the there are two lessons. One I may not be able to articulate very well, but I'll try. The one that
Okay.
I can articulate easily is um, everything comes back to the paradoxical theory of change. Absolutely everything. That um, until you can bear to start with what is and all the things that that's tied to by however many threads,
Hmm.
um, there's no trying that is going to do anything. There, there is no intention that's going to make you anything else.
Hmm.
And that was a wonderful and comfortable and terrifying and impossible thing to learn.
Hmm.
And you don't learn it once. You learn it again and again and again and again and again and
Yep.
again.
Yeah, even I'm starting to pick up on that. I'm a little slow, but I'm learning. Yep. And the one that you can't articulate?
The one that I can't articulate is um, it's the it's the sensation of the intervention that lands. I
Hmm.
mean, in me, not ones that I offer, but
Hmm.
um, uh, at one moment, my then partner and I were the demonstration couple at the end of um, a training,
Hmm.
and Sonia had us having a conversation with one another. and she and I were raising my then teenage daughters together, and um, we were in a very difficult moment. She was not someone who ever wanted kids, and
Oh.
I and it was very hard for her. And she was a lot younger than me, and a lot closer to their age than she was to mine, as a matter of fact. And we were in a tangle about it, and of course, very interested in the content of what we were talking about. And uh, the first time, Sonia said what she notices is that I was um, good at tipping back, and that my partner was good at tipping forward.
Hmm.
And that was interesting. I didn't quite know what to do with it. We kept going at about the same um, rate and style. And then Sonia came over and she put a finger on my partner's shoulder and a finger on my shoulder. And she pushed her back and me forward just an inch. And my body understood what she was talking about.
Hmm.
And so she prepared the ground. She said the idea. It didn't get in. She did this very gentle movement that had none of the drama that I had
Hmm.
previously associated with Gestalt, and my body learned it.
Hmm.
And that was an incredible moment. And I started thinking, it's not how big the intervention is. The, the smaller it is, the more assimilable it is. And it just has to be timed right. It
Hmm.
just has to be timed when someone can take it in.
Hmm.
And then how she knew was a mystery. And now it doesn't feel like how I know is a mystery.
Right.
I, I can I can describe what gave me the clue.
Hmm. Yeah, it doesn't sound like you had any problem articulating that at all. That was that was incredibly. That was like
When I thought
palpable.
of it, it was when I thought of it, it was a sensation. It
Mhm.
was just in my body. I just
Yeah,
re-experienced it.
but that's exactly the point. It's right there. It's palpable. It's right there. Okay. So one of the last things that I tend to ask about is what's next. And I mean, you've said no retirement in the near future, and that's exciting because maybe I'll get to find you at some point and do some more of this and see what you do. So what would you say is next for you? And I'm also interested in, especially from your white privilege perspective, what is next for Gestalt? Like, what is coming up differently? What can be changed? What can adapt?
The question is, I think, what can become figural?
Okay.
Um, it's been a thread in Gestalt forever.
Mm-hmm.
So from Paul Goodman, who was about as political as a person could be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Ed Nevis and Joe Melnick wrote a book together called Healing the World, which it didn't write it, collected it. It was
Okay.
from it was just Gestalt social change efforts
Mm-hmm.
in Africa, in Northern Ireland,
Mm-hmm.
from um, from a Gestalt perspective. Those threads are always there. They just need to be emphasized. They just need to be given a little uh, weight and a little space and
They just need a good thread collector.
and and I think that it is happening. What I've noticed is that it's organically happening in a lot of institutes. When I looked at a couple of your interviews in from GTIP, I noticed that it was almost
Mhm,
a convention for them to say what pronouns they like to use
mhm,
um, right at the beginning. And I know that GTIP has been doing a lot of race work and a lot of gender work. And I
mhm,
never um, would have thought um, of that as a core interest of theirs, but I see that they're doing it,
mhm,
and I begin to hear it from other places as well.
mhm,
So, um, uh, you know, I started picking up this particular piece at Gestalt International Study Center, but people are picking it up everywhere.
mhm.
So I do think that the interplay between social context and social justice and relational work and organizational work is um, is evolving, and it's evolving because it's time in many cultures, and it's bubbling up, and people are talking to each other about it.
I think it's part of what you say that it's, it'll really go in when it's ready, when we're ready to take it and when it's able to be
Right.
assimilated. And it's interesting. I have noticed that in we've done almost 190 interviews, I think, at this point, and it's just so much more present and palpable. Every interview almost mentions some aspect of social justice and privilege and reparations and just
Mm-hmm.
an awareness. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very different from
Mm-hmm.
an individualistic theatrical paradigm.
Mm-hmm. I I know that my grandchildren were profoundly active in the spring in Black Lives Matter,
Hmm.
and I'm not surprised that they were interested, but I was surprised that they were active, and I was terrified. I mean,
Hmm.
think COVID and demonstration in the same uh, breath, and
Yeah.
it's got to scare you.
Hmm.
Um, but I think um, it's in the air. Good-hearted people can't help knowing, and the fact that the world kind of stopped in certain ways made it awfully hard to not have it in your awareness.
Hmm.
And I don't think Gestalt is immune to that in any way.
No. Hmm. Okay. Was there anything else that you would say was coming up next for you in particular, or anything else that you'd like to add?
Um, I don't even know if this has any particular relevance. It goes back to the sacred space notion. I
Hmm.
have a place in the world that is my absolute favorite place to be. It's a little tiny island off the coast of Maine. Um, and it's been sort of a sacred place to me since 1962. And there was a period when I was really, really active in my um, 40s and 50s that I used to do group workshops there that were a week long and highly intensive. And recently I've been doing some supervision groups there. Um,
Hmm.
I went back to it after a long period of time. It's just to take people who are either as organizational people or clinicians really profoundly interested in Gestalt work and in that kind of um, sacred space creation,
Mm.
and uh, and just trying to share that enough so that it's a possibility for them. It becomes part of what they're interested in.
Hmm.
That that it's like wanting to spread a culture or a song. It's
Mhm.
um, it's just wanting more of that experience to be more available to more people.
That sounds wonderful. Yeah, I'm just meeting you for the first time, and I'm curious about how it would feel to be in a space that you were holding. So that's very inviting what you're saying. Hmm. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add at this point, or should we leave it here? I've really appreciated everything that you've been sharing and the way that, like you said, it's just kind of woven from one place to the next.
Um, I think that's about it. I I would love to. I, we're so different from each other. I would love to connect you with the other people in my little Gestalt International Study Center circle, because
I would love
I
that.
think you might enjoy them very much as well,
Wonderful. So
and I
to be
think they would
continued.
enjoy
We'll
you.
follow the lines. Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay.
Okay,
Well, thank you.
it's been delightful talking with you.
Yes. Thank you.